That's very diplomatic of you. You didn't make any assumptions about the future of it, but you said it's going to be challenging. And I can take that. Because now let's get back to Bitcoin. I've seen your involvement in the B Foundation, which wasn't supposed to be called a foundation. It was supposed to be just the B. But as I've learned from Giacomo, he told me that at first it was just the B, but then he had to fill in some forms and he had to make it a foundation for legal reasons. And that leaked and it didn't end so well just because people have such a bitter memory of the Bitcoin Foundation, which somehow still exists for reasons. But what is your involvement more precisely?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's more of a branding versus a legal technical issue, I guess. I'll probably generally be referring to it as the B, but yeah, for legal reasons, it has to have foundation on the legal documents. So really, Giacomo is driving this effort because he was basically doing similar stuff with his BHB network in Italy, where he was funding various projects basically on his own. And then Elena is the force behind the legal entity, but she's taking more of a hands-off approach and doing more of the advising, which is what the rest of us are doing, which basically means that we're all in a chat room and email list and discussing various decisions that will need to be made. This is mostly going to be fairly inane stuff of saying, well, do we want to put this project in our tree of donations that people can say that they want to allocate funds to, and what are the major initiatives that we want to try to fund in this space. I think inevitably there probably will be some more contention around outreach efforts. Some people are going to get triggered and think that we're trying to represent the ecosystem or various aspects of the ecosystem. I was pretty clear up front that I don't want to be involved in anything that is trying to lobby governments or trying to create propaganda or perspectives of what people believe Bitcoin should be. Rather, I'm interested in trying to fund different projects that are trying to build on top of Bitcoin and Lightning and what other, sidechains, really any other technologies that are building on top of Bitcoin, just to try to continue to spur adoption and developer interest in the system. And I was actually trying to do something like this on my own about a year ago. I was talking to attorneys in the United States, trying to figure out if I could form a charitable organization. And it turns out the IRS in the United States made it very difficult to do that for open source software projects about 15 years ago. So there's only 3 or 4 out there, like the Linux Foundation, that are actually charitable organizations that support free and open source software development. And then, when Elena came to me and was saying, she was trying to do something similar, but she was doing it in Liechtenstein because the legal environment seems to be better there, I said, I'm all in, and whatever I can do to contribute will be great. And then it turns out there's a lot of other people in the space who have been thinking the same thing. And just from conversations I've had over the years, I think that there is a fair amount of demand and funding out there that would be interested in basically helping grow the ecosystem by donating to different projects, but there just hasn't been a good vehicle for it. And I think the Bitcoin Foundation had an opportunity to do that, but they made a number of mistakes. They stretched themselves too thin. They tried to be everything for Bitcoin. And I'm hoping that by keeping a much more narrow focus on more of the technical side of things, that we can succeed where they failed.
I think you are just too nice with the Bitcoin Foundation because it had financial interest in the first place. So it didn't begin as something which wanted to preserve or improve the protocol, or maybe help with scholarships for the next generation of developers to emerge. It was just made out of Charlie Shrem and who else was on board? Just
Yeah, it
people
was more of an industry
who had,
association, but then I think that they also compounded their issues. Without talking about the specific personalities, there were a number of people there who ended up having legal issues, which didn't help. But they also made it, of course, this general membership organization, and they created a very rigid bureaucracy, basically. And I think the bureaucracy didn't help. It probably slowed things down, and also like resulted in making it easy for misappropriation and misallocation of resources, because they ended up blowing through I don't even know how many tens of millions of dollars, where if they had taken a longer term approach and held on to some of those funds, then they would have been easily sustained for 10 years, if not longer. And I think that the main reason that they still exist, because I still read the meeting notes from time to time, it seems like mainly from donations of the board members. Like I know Brock Pierce has been donating a significant amount of ether to the Bitcoin Foundation. And of course, that lost a lot of value over the past year. So the Bitcoin Foundation lost a lot of money, but they can continue doing whatever they feel like doing. It just seems like they're not doing much anymore. I'm not entirely sure why they exist. Francis Poulier, who is helping with the B now, he was on the Bitcoin Foundation board, and he seemed to indicate that it was mostly just a phone call once a month or so, and not much else actually going on.
I think at the end of the day, Bitcoin does need lobbying, but it doesn't have to be centralized. So you can just speak on your behalf as a person who is involved in Bitcoin, but it doesn't make much sense for a protocol which is distributed and at the same time it's open source. You shouldn't be speaking on behalf of everybody, because usually you find that there are so many dissonances and differences of opinion. Is that how you pronounce it? Dissonances?
Yeah, dissonance.
No, the plural form. Dissonance is the singular, but the plural?
I think the plural is the same as the singular.
Really? Okay, I'm gonna look it up after. But I'm about to ask you about the Liquid network, which Blockstream has launched a few days ago. You think ultimately that it's a good idea to centralize some transactions from the exchanges and have a side chain just for them as a way of decongesting the main chain? A lot of people seem to be skeptical and point out to Blockstream that they're actually turning Bitcoin into something which they don't like, but at the same time, it's not mandatory to use it. If it fails, you still have Bitcoin the way we know it and we use it.
Yeah, so interestingly enough, I have a very privileged perspective of this, and that is because I spent 3 years working at BitGo, and BitGo, of course, services a lot of the large crypto exchanges out there. So we actually had the ability to see what some of the fund flows look like between exchanges, and what we could tell very easily is that there is a lot of redundant fund flows between exchanges. And the reason for this is that when you have 10,000 users on like OKCoin, and they also have accounts on Bitstamp, and they want to send money from OKCoin to Bitstamp, then each of those users is going to request a withdrawal from OKCoin and put in their Bitstamp address and click submit, and do whatever other security things are required. And then OKCoin is just going to see this list of addresses, and they might be a little bit efficient. They might batch them up in a few transactions with a lot of outputs. But still, at the end of the day, they're going to be creating a lot of transactions and a lot of UTXOs to essentially move money from one entity to another. So, this is highly inefficient. And the reason for this is, mainly due to the pseudonymous, like semi-private nature of the network. It's because OKCoin doesn't know that all of these users are sending it to Bitstamp, to the same entity. All they see are these random addresses. And take that, particular example and basically multiply it by a factor of like n factorial for however many different exchanges there are and users on those exchanges. And I think that as a result, there is a significant fraction of block space that is being used up doing nothing more than sending money from one exchange to another back and forth as users are rebalancing their accounts and just going about their normal activities. So there's a couple different ways, of course, that you can try to get around that and make that more efficient. One way would be to like kill off the privacy and have people identify that they're sending to a specific exchange, and then the exchanges can form these private agreements and kind of like settle up on a daily basis, not unlike banks. Another way is that you can use a second layer network. So hopefully one day all of the exchanges will also be integrated with one another on the Lightning Network. And a lot of these cross-exchange transactions can happen on the Lightning Network. But we're not there yet. And it's unclear how long it's going to take before we see major exchanges adopting Lightning Network for withdrawals and deposits. I think one or two small exchanges already have. And then, of course, another way is like you could call it second layer solution, use some sort of side chain, some other thing that is cryptographically tied to Bitcoin. And so Liquid is one of those. It just happens to be like more permissioned than Lightning is. But I think it's going to be like a faster way to get towards that. They've been working on Liquid for years, and now they're actually deploying it. Hopefully this will, give us a bit more congestion reduction in the near term and kind of provide a stopgap solution, at least until Lightning becomes more of a thing. And, maybe it takes off and it also ends up doing a ton of transaction volume itself, because remember that it's also got additional privacy features that you don't get on Bitcoin. Arguably better privacy even than you would get on Lightning Network, though it's kind of hard to compare those two things. But yeah, I mean, nobody is forced to use Liquid either. So, from a moral perspective, I have no problem with it. From a technical perspective, if people, look at the security model and the privacy model that Liquid offers to them, and they decide that Liquid is going to benefit their use case, then by all means, I think they should use it.
I think the only part about the Liquid network, which I do not understand very clearly, is how they want to be geographically diverse, in the sense that they don't want to concentrate too many exchanges from one continent or one country, so that the political factor, like the government which imposes new policies, shouldn't shift the governance of the sidechain as a whole. But at the same time, we can see that exchanges are very much concentrated in certain countries, some which offer maybe better financial policies, better tax situations. So I find it hard to understand how they're going to make this work and how they're going to maintain the balance.
Yeah, I mean, that is the tricky thing when you have a federation, though. You could argue that they have a little more control over that balance than we have in a more permissionless system like with miners. Basically nobody can control what the geographic distribution of miners is. It's more of an issue of just sort of natural resources and a ton of other factors that are outside of the control of pretty much any human. So but yeah, I mean, it's a different security model, and it it may be difficult to reason about, especially if you're looking at the sort of nation state attacker level. I guess the ultimate end game scenario though is, what is the worst thing that can possibly happen if you're using liquid? If, say, there was some sort of even multi-nation state level attack that manages to shut down the whole liquid network, my understanding is that you should still be able to then basically retrieve your coins back, on the main Bitcoin chain.
Mm-hmm.
So, as long as it is, protected against like total loss of funds, which seems to be the entire point of a sidechain, is that you can screw around on there. And even if the sidechain fails, no one should actually lose money. That seems like a win-win.
I was thinking about this model of governance that at some point we might see a Chinese exchange which wants to get in, but they will say, no, just wait until another US exchange gets in so that we have balance, and another one from Korea, and they want to have this sort of harmony, which maybe that it's a good idea. And I also like the fact that they don't care about the size or the volume of the exchange. They don't care if it's Coinbase or Binance or OKCoin. They just want to have one exchange, one vote. But then again, that can also be exploited in the sense that you can divide a big exchange into smaller divisions and have more voting power.
Well, yeah, I mean, you have to be wary of the type of issues that we've seen in like EOS, for example, of like block producers voting for themselves and all of that.
So yeah, that was nasty, but at the same time, it's expected. Corruption is part of the human nature, even though we don't define it as corruption. It's just, back in the ancient times, it was all about how about the two of us get together and beat that guy because we're stronger together. It's about the incentive and maybe accomplishing something which otherwise you wouldn't be able to do by yourself. So
Yeah, it's all about
should
incentives.
have been expected on their behalf.